In the mountains of northern Tunisia in February 1943, a cold wind slipped through cracks in the rock and let out a keening, whistle-like wail. The German listening post, known as Eagle's Nest, was embedded in the jagged limestone mass, and Ernst Heller's fingertips hovered over the icy tuning knob of the BC-604 receiver, trembling slightly. It was not from the cold, but from the protest of nerve endings after 16 straight hours of focus. His headphones were filled with the hiss of static, distant fragments of encrypted American tactical traffic, and the occasional harsh, repetitive query from his own headquarters. Then, as he turned the knob half a degree to the left and swept across a band that usually held nothing but background cosmic noise, something pierced the chaos, an echo so faint it felt ready to shatter in the next second. The signal was so brief it was almost an illusion, yet its modulation was unnervingly distinct, an unorthodox keyed pattern that carried the fingerprints of an early SCR 299 set and yet had clearly been modified. Ernst's heart clenched. Blood rushed behind his ears. 3 weeks earlier, a signals man retreating from the Eastern Front had mentioned in vague and broken terms that some surrounded units had dismantled captured American gear and tried to cobble together working radios, including old SCR 299 variants. And the last time Ernst had received a terse message from the communications detachment of the 6th Army, where his brother Friedrich served, it had included a line that would not leave him trying to use every resource at hand to establish contact, time, model, possibility, and extremis. In Ernst's mind, those 3 points snapped together into a single burning line. He held his breath. His finger reflexively clicked the stopwatch. With the other hand, he grabbed the open K-27 standard monitoring log, but at the moment his pen touched the page, he hesitated. Regulations said any non-friendly signal without clear tactical value should be reported to the duty officer first. His eyes flicked over the log's cold, standardized fields: frequency, time, signal, strength assessment, probable origin. Those words could not contain what the signal might be carrying. In the end, he flipped to the last pages of the logbook, pages that had been blank. In a tighter, finer hand than usual, he wrote 0217, band near 3.85 megahertz, signal strength 1, extremely weak, modulation characteristics irregular, CW, suspected manual keying, harmonic distribution shows 60% match to a modified American SCR 299 type. Note, continue observation. He omitted the standard table. Beneath the note, he drew a small symbol only he would understand, an F circled in ink. The signal did not return. Like a drop of water falling into hot sand, it evaporated instantly and left no trace. For the next 2 hours, Ernst held that band and its adjacent range with a death grip, pushing the receiver's RF gain to the threshold where it would start dragging in too much noise. In his ears there was only American traffic that suddenly became more active and far less predictable, frequency hopping chatter that used a new, more complex sequence. The old semi-forecastable rhythm of channel changes was gone, replaced by an irritating mesh. He knew what it meant: upgraded counter-monitoring measures. His private hunt, from the moment he caught that flicker of echo, had run headlong into a technical wall that was thickening by the hour. In the blackest hour before dawn, the relief operator entered the damp cavern room, rubbing his hands. Ernst closed the logbook and left the standard pages facing outward, covering the private notes behind them. In the flat tone of routine handover, he reported, overnight U.S., company-level traffic increased. A frequency hopping pattern changed. The initial segment of the new sequence has been recorded, no other anomalies. His voice did not ripple. After the exchange, he did not crawl into a sleeping bag like the others. He stayed behind under the pretext of checking equipment and lifted the BC-604's cover again. In the beam of his flashlight, vacuum tubes glowed faint orange. Capacitors and coils sat in neat ranks. His gaze dropped to a tiny, irregular white scuff beneath the main tuning shaft. Left 3 years earlier in his apartment in Cologne, the first time he and Friedrich had tested this black market treasure, when his brother had slipped and tapped the metal with a screwdriver. Friedrich's frustrated expression was still vivid. Ernst brushed the mark with the lightest touch of his fingertip, then picked up his meter and began checking circuit parameters one by one. Perfect maintenance was one of the few things he could still do for himself and for the thin, stubborn hope he could not name aloud. The machine had to remain in peak condition, as if sensitivity and the probability of catching that ghost signal were the same thing. Day after day, Ernst's work became a double assignment. On the surface, he was Eagle's Nest's exemplary operator, precisely recording the communications patterns of the U.S. Second Corps, call sign, prefix shifts, radio fingerprints, traffic routines. Privately, the back half of his logbook filled with another kind of record. There were dense frequency-time coordinate plots, bold hypotheses about American units, rhythms, and peak traffic windows, annotations of anomalous harmonics and transient bursts. Beside them always was the small F. The BC-604 receiver became his only altar, and that scuffed mark his secret inscription. He knew the drag and resistance of every knob. He knew the particular hum of the transformer as the set warmed. He even knew the subtle frequency drift under different temperatures. He avoided official monitoring windows with care and used every sliver of opportunity, an interval between tasks, a colleague stepping out briefly, a staged calibration, to perform his futile scans. He did not realize that the same moment he caught that aberrant echo and tried to follow it, dozens of kilometers away, the head of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division's Communications Security Section, Captain Richardson, was frowning at a signal propagation analysis chart. A technical sergeant had just submitted a report in a specific sector to the northwest. They had detected several brief, unauthorized scanning attempts aimed at certain American backup or test frequencies. The scan pattern suggests the operator has considerable professional knowledge, the sergeant concluded, but the intent is unclear. He may be trying to locate our command nodes or test a new set. Richardson circled the sector with a pencil and issued new instructions. Effective immediately, Chameleon Protocol was authorized. All battalion and company elements would add a randomized pseudo-sequence on top of existing frequency hopping, and enforcement of radio silence discipline would be tightened. He did not treat the unknown German listener as a primary threat. It was simply procedure. Any potential cuiton, any attempt to peer through the veil, had to be met with a thicker technical curtain. In a professional world, this was the quiet prelude to a killing contest waged by rules and circuitry. Ernst's search had already triggered a systemic cold countermeasure before he fully understood what he had touched. In the weeks that followed, the Tunisian rainy season arrived early. Low leaden clouds sat on the mountains. Dampness seeped into the rock and made electronics temperamental. Ernst's private scanning grew more covert and more exhausting. Through statistical analysis of intercepted traffic, he sketched the likely rhythms of several U.S. frontline companies, some spiked in volume during evening supply movements, others around pre-dawn relief rotations. He paid particular attention to a motorized reconnaissance element designated Spade B, whose messages sometimes included fragments of non-standard equipment serial strings and vague mentions of test receive. In his mind, that hinted at the possibility of captured or improvised hardware. He overlaid Spade B's active windows with the narrow scraps of time he could steal without drawing attention, and he marked the overlap on his private coordinate plots, a slim opportunity corridor filled with risk. On a rainy night in mid-March, the corridor seemed to open. Routine monitoring ended at 0200. The relief operator complained about aching joints, swallowed aspirin, wrapped himself in a blanket, and soon began to snore in the corner. Ernst stayed at the console under the pretext of calibrating the antenna matching unit. Outside, rain hammered the rock and covered the faint startup buzz of the receiver. Following his own plots, he tuned near a frequency Spade B had used recently and narrowed the BC604's bandwidth to filter some of the rain-induced static. In his headphones, the background noise was a steady shush. Occasionally, a far-off burst of Morse flicked past like a fish in dark water. Seconds dragged into minutes. Condensation beaded on the edge of the desk and dripped onto his log paper, blooming into a small stain beside his hand. The expected signal did not come. He widened his scan and turned the knob slowly, his fingertips whitening, still nothing but hollow noise. Then, just as he was about to give up, the signal strength meter needle twitched, barely, and in the headphones he heard a tiny, razor-brief tick that carried a trace of the same keying character he remembered. Ernst jolted so hard he almost cried out. He stabilized the dial and nudged the fine-tuned capacitor, trying to lock on. The needle fell back. The sound vanished as if it had never existed. He searched neighboring bands again and again, his movements growing faster, less controlled. The knob began to rasp faintly with friction. Nothing. Frustration soaked down his spine like cold rain. Either his inference was wrong, or the invisible opponent on the other end of the spectrum had noticed something and changed patterns. He could not hide everything. Days later, during an equipment and log inspection, the duty officer, Second Lieutenant Klaus, found nothing amiss on the standard pages but questioned Ernst's recent frequent self-calibration and excessive consumption of spare tubes. "Heller, I know you're conscientious," Klaus said, tapping the K-27 logbook cover with a suspicious knuckle. "But equipment needs maintenance, and men need rest. I don't want Eagle's Nest's best ear to fail from fatigue or from unnecessary focus. Starting tomorrow, your continuous watch will not exceed 12 hours, and any non-mission equipment power-up must have my approval." The order landed like a shackle. The little freedom Ernst had carved out for long secret scans was gone. He was forced to break his plan into smaller, more dangerous fragments. The tightened leash only sharpened his obsession. Ernst changed approach. If he could not wait and hold, he would try to reconstruct from fragments. He assumed that if Friedrich or his comrades were using American equipment in urgent transmissions, they might inadvertently reveal slivers about the set's condition, battery types, even terrain, snatches that might surface in low-grade clear traffic or the gaps around encrypted communications. That meant running the BC-604 on a wider passband, monitoring multiple related points, and bearing the crushing load of filtering. The receiver ran hot under sustained strain. The glass of the tubes grew warmer than usual. The odor of ozone and heated resin thickened inside the casing. Ernst began to notice a near imperceptible periodic drift when he tuned certain frequencies. The audio would tremble faintly. He swapped out several aging capacitors from spares, but the instability persisted, as if the machine itself had grown nervous under the daily pressure. The scuff beside the knob, under his frequent and forceful micro-adjustments, seemed slightly polished by his fingertips. At the same time, Richardson's communication security team continued to tighten the net. Triangulation narrowed the suspicious listening source to the mountain region where Eagle's Nest sat. A new analysis arrived. Target behavior has shifted from fixed-point scanning to wideband short-sample bursts suggesting pattern recognition or keyword filtering. Richardson wrote a margin note, implement second-stage countermeasure Ghost Decoy. Authorized generate 3 test signals with partial non-standard SCR-299 modified harmonic characteristics. Transmit at irregular intervals at low power near targets likely attention bands. Each transmission under 10 seconds. Record any reaction. It was a more refined trap, feeding the adversary a false target shaped to match his likely search bias. In the first week of April, during a brutally drowsy midday watch, Ernst almost received what felt like a revelation. He was recording routine chatter on a U.S. artillery coordination band, his mind dulled by the monotonous cadence of encrypted voice. Then, behind the noise, a weak but startlingly crisp signal cut in, the keying rhythm, the harmonic spread, its similarity to the February echo felt overwhelming, close to 80%. Blood surged into his head. He sat bolt upright, smashing his knee against the console and not even noticing. He wrenched the receiver's controls. This time the meter needle held steady a notch above baseline. He grabbed his private notebook. His hand shook so badly he could barely write as he recorded frequency, time, and signature details. The signal lasted perhaps 8 seconds, then stopped. Ernst's heart thundered. A roaring filled his ears. Joy and vertigo swallowed him. Had he done it? Had he found it? For the next half hour, he stayed pinned to that band, waiting for the signal to return. 15 minutes later, it came again. Nearly identical signature, nearly identical duration. He wrote it down, and a thread of doubt began to pull at him too clean. After another 20 minutes, it appeared a third time. This time, Ernst forced himself to cool down and apply every ounce of professional rigor. He found the flaw. Across all 3 transmissions, despite irregular spacing and time, the waveform, the decay pattern, even the microscopic texture of background noise were almost perfectly identical. In real manual operation, power fluctuations, microsecond differences in human keying, and moment-to-moment changes in propagation paths made such perfect repetition effectively impossible. This was not a human at a battered key. It was closer to a carefully tuned signal generator replaying a recording. Reality hit like ice water. This was not Friedrich's signal. It was bait, a decoy designed for him or for anyone like him, precise and merciless. He had been fooled. Worse, the decoy proved that the system across the line not only knew he was hunting, but knew what he hoped to find, and used that knowledge to conjure an exquisite illusion meant to shame and drain him. Joy turned instantly into a deeper despair and a burning anger at being seen through. Ernst ripped off the headphones and slammed them onto the console with a dull crack. A colleague dozing in the corner jerked awake and stared at him confused. Ernst's chest heaved, his eyes were threaded with red, his gaze fixed on the BC-604 receiver. In the violence of his emotions, the careful habits that had governed his work with the delicate set fractured. The next time he adjusted frequency, his grip on the tuning knob lost its old finesse and control. The motion was rough, almost punitive. Somewhere inside the chassis there was a tiny, ominous click, so faint it could have been imagined. He ignored it or could not afford to notice it. In his private notebook beside the decoy signal entry, he blacked out the lines with furious strokes until the paper nearly tore. The framework he had built from expertise and logic cracked open under emotion, and the crack ran straight into the machine that had begun to hum with quiet unease. By mid-April 1943, the air over Tunisia felt congealed, taut with the suffocating pressure that precedes a major assault. The Allies' final offensive was close. The battle in the ether was already at full boil. American traffic density and complexity surged to an extreme. Orders, coordinates, status reports pouring through encrypted channels like a digitized storm. For Eagle's Nest, it was both a mine and a furnace. Second Lieutenant Klaus, eyes rimmed with red, drove the operators relentlessly to catch any fragment that might reveal the direction of the coming blow. Ernst sat at his console and maintained a mask of professional concentration, noting channel occupancy, newly emerging call sign prefixes. Inside, another thought clawed him in a flood this vast. Might the real ghost signal be swept along within it? Chaos, perhaps, was the only opening it could ever have. He slept in scraps of hours. He lived on strong coffee and raw nerve. The BC-604 barely cooled. The long-running heat from the tubes warped the air above the casing. The scuffed mark by the knob stood out more sharply under the constant, sometimes brutal tuning. The set was protesting in unmistakable ways, a low AC hum that would not vanish, a slight backlash in the dial around a certain range, moments when the audio would suddenly dull and only a hard slap to the chassis would bring it back. Any experienced operator knew those were signs of a receiver at the edge of failure. Ernst pretended not to see them. In his eyes, the machine was no longer just a tool. It was a comrade being ground down beside him in a last charge against impossible odds, or perhaps a sacrifice. His private notebook filled with frantic projections, attempting to find seams and shadow channels that might slip through American frequency hopping. On April 18th, at roughly 0300, An American division-level coordination exercise began, or perhaps it was the opening of the assault itself. Ernst's headphones were instantly flooded with massive volumes of the newest encrypted voice and data signals. Needles on multiple meters danced. The background noise floor rose violently. Within that manufactured electromagnetic storm, Ernst's intuition, long since sharpened into something close to hallucination by obsession, told him he had caught a trace of discord. It was not a full signal, but an extremely subtle dissonance mixed into multi-carrier modulation, a sideband feature whose spectral shape overlapped for a brief moment with the after image of the ghost signal he remembered. Reason said it was likely a mirage created by intermodulation among strong transmissions. But under mental and physical exhaustion, a hint that thin was enough to ignite his final gamble, he decided to force separation. It was a high-risk maneuver, sharpening selectivity to its narrowest point and pushing RF gain far beyond normal limits, trying to dig a non-existent whisper out from heavy adjacent channel interference. It was like trying to hear a pin drop in a hurricane, pointless and dangerous to the receiver's sensitive front end. His hands shook from weakness and adrenaline, yet his grip on the controls was hard, decisive. He snapped bandwidth to the narrowest setting. He cranked gain clockwise to the mechanical stop. He worked the fine-tuned capacitor back and forth quickly, making the part squeal faintly. The BC604 emitted a low, strained groan. The speaker output turned to severe distortion, mixing into a shriek and tearing crackle. A key object became the medium that drove an irreversible change. When he suddenly twisted the main tuning knob again, trying to chase a fast-drifting interference harmonic, there came a sharp, clean snap from the shaft, unlike any friction sound before. In the next instant, a small burst of bright blue arc flashed inside the chassis, the air filled with the stinging bite of ozone and the heavy stink of scorched insulation. All the needles slammed to their maximums, then sagged back to zero. Every sound from the speaker, noise, signal, shriek, died into an abrupt, absolute silence. The BC604 receiver that had sat with him for 3 years, bearing the full weight of his skill and hope, went dark. The pilot lamp extinguished completely, leaving only a mute metal carcass that still radiated heat and the bitter odor of burn. The tuning knob sagged crookedly. Beneath it, that scuffed mark caught the dim emergency light like a cold, mocking period. Ernst froze as if time had stopped. Then seconds later he went wild. He slapped the casing, shook it, fumbled the power switch again and again. Nothing, only dead silence. The physical fact was brutal and final. The instrument of the search was gone. 3 years of endurance, calculation, fear, hope, evaporated into smoke and acrid air. The entire structure he had used to keep himself upright collapsed in a single moment. What the relief operator and then Klaus found was a man in complete breakdown. Ernst did not weep at first. He simply stared at the smoking receiver, then began to tremble uncontrollably, teeth chattering hard. When Klaus snapped, "What happened, you idiot? You destroyed the set." Ernst jerked up, eyes bloodshot and unfocused, a red emptiness behind them. He seemed not to see Klaus or the others crowding in. His gaze drilled through rock and distance toward a frozen line in the east. Friedrich, he rasped in German, and then words burst out in a scrambled mix of English and German, rising from whisper to shout. Signal, I've been looking for 3 years. That frequency, American radio, the scuff, he might still be there. Stalingrad, cold. I have to find it. Now it's gone. The machine is gone. He clawed at his hair, fingers digging into scalp. Please, someone tell me where he is. He was only using a broken American set. Please listen. He turned from Klaus to the others as if they could answer. Then his eyes landed on the smoking receiver, and he let out a raw sound, half howl and half sob, and slid down the console to the icy floor, curling in on himself, shoulders shaking. The commotion drew in an American technical officer who happened to be moving along the front to inspect communications installations. When Captain Richardson entered Eagle's Nest under guard, he saw a ruined receiver, the smell of scorch and ozone, and a captive German soldier being held down by others while he raved in fragments about brother and signal. Richardson listened without expression as Klaus stammered a report that hid Ernst's private motive and framed the failure as operational error. Then he stepped to the BC-604, pulled on gloves, and made a quick inspection. His eyes moved over the work surface and stopped on an open K-27 log and on a second notebook, clearly private, filled with odd markings and repeated F symbols. He flipped through several pages. The professional frequency notes, time plots, and signature analyses were a sharp contrast to the collapsed man on the floor. Richardson displayed no personal reaction. He turned to his technical sergeant and issued calm, precise instructions that cut through the confusion. Sergeant Record 1 captured German listening station receiver destroyed, model BC-604. Photograph and log the serial number. All related logs and notes are to be sealed as technical analysis material. This man, he said, indicating Ernst, is to be transferred to medics immediately. Evaluate mental state. Use sedatives if required. I want a detailed technical report on how his operation led to the failure and a preliminary analysis of the anomalous signal features referenced in these private notes. His orders stayed strictly inside the professional frame: assess equipment loss, secure potentially valuable records, address personnel status. Days later, at a rear area prisoner processing point, an official request signed by Captain Richardson entered the intelligence circulation stream. The title read, Technical Traceback Request Regarding a Specific Non-Standard Radio Signal Signature. In the justification field, he wrote, in clipped, neutral language, inspection of captured German monitoring materials indicates prolonged tracking of a specific, rare, non-standard signal signature beyond routine tactical listening. To complete signal signature databases and to exclude the possibility that the signature represents an unknown vulnerability in friendly communications or a novel enemy probing method, recommend coordinated retrospective comparison and analysis of archived signal records. Parameters for comparison follow. Attached were the pure technical parameters extracted from Ernst's private notes, stripped of the personal symbol, along with the serial number of the destroyed BC-604. The report mentioned no brother. It mentioned no searching. It mentioned no breakdown. It translated a private obsession soaked in blood and grief into a cold, technical anomaly the system could process. The procedure began, and Ernst, after long hours of drugged sleep, woke in a guarded barracks to a landscape of internal ruin and a world of absolute silence. His war, in a way he never imagined, seemed finished. Another search run by others, by rules and archives, had only just started. 6 months was enough time for Tunisia to shift from muddy battlefield to a rear base for the Allied advance into Europe, and enough time for a prisoner camp to settle into a dull, unbreakable routine. Ernst Heller was assigned to a Class III POW camp near the edge of Algeria, holding large numbers of junior officers and technical personnel. His days were cut into precise blocks: morning roll call, labor assignment, usually maintaining simple circuits inside the camp or repairing tables and chairs, lunch, political instruction, free time, evening roll call. He no longer touched any radio equipment. He even avoided the communications tent used by camp administration. The sharp craving that had once driven his entire existence toward a specific frequency seemed to have died with the BC 604s burning. What remained was a vast, empty fatigue. He grew quiet, compliant, performing tasks with ghost-like precision. His gaze often rested on the far horizon or on the tool in his hand, unfocused. Fellow prisoners thought he had been shaken, but was still manageable. Guards considered him a low-maintenance example. Only at night sometimes he would snap awake from uneasy sleep and find his hand turning an invisible tuning knob in the dark. Then he would stop, hold still, and slowly let his arm fall. Waiting itself had become a dull ache by habit. In October, North Africa was still not fully free of heat. One afternoon, Ernst was patching damage on the roof of the camp library, a rough shed, when a guard shouted his name and told him to report to the administration office. Summons were not unusual: spot checks, paperwork verification. Ernst set down his tool, dusted his hands, and followed across the sandy yard. His pulse stayed level. He had long since stopped spending even the thought of hope. The administration office was a whitewashed building, cooler than outside, smelling of paper, weak coffee, and sweat. Captain Richardson stood beside a metal desk, speaking quietly with the camp's American supervisor. Richardson wore a standard olive-brown service uniform with no special insignia. He looked like an ordinary signals officer handling routine business. On the desk lay a thin manila folder stamped "Restricted." When Ernst was brought in, Richardson ended the conversation. The supervisor nodded and moved to the far side of the room, signaling the guard to wait outside. The room held only the two men and a humming electric fan. Richardson did not offer greetings. He did not look into Ernst's eyes longer than necessary. He opened the folder and withdrew a document no more than 3 pages long, its header printed with a Joint Intelligence Analysis Bureau number. "Heller," he said in German, pronouncing the name accurately and without warmth. "Regarding the specific radio signal characteristics you previously focused on and recorded, we have completed retrospective verification according to technical procedure. I am here to brief you on the conclusion." His tone was that of an equipment report. Ernst's posture tightened slightly, but his face showed almost nothing. Only his jawline drew tauter. Richardson read out the parameters: approximate frequency range, modulation type, harmonic characteristics, and then the key result: cross-comparison of archived spectrum data from the U.S. Communications Records Center covering July 1942 through April 1943, along with relevant theater captured equipment records and limited prisoner interrogation reports, confirms that signal activity matching some or all of these characteristics was concentrated from late November to mid-December 1942. Geographic origin is assessed as southwest of the Stalingrad area. Recorded signal strength was generally weak. Transmissions were intermittent. The last reliably recorded instance was January 7, 1943. Since that date, no further signal matching this characteristic set has been monitored. Based on subsequent operations in that sector and the communications disruption that followed, it is reasonable to infer that the transmitting source ceased activity in early to mid-January 1943. Verification complete. Richardson finished. He returned the document to the folder and looked at Ernst with no pity and no curiosity, only the procedural need to confirm receipt. "Do you understand?" he asked. Ernst stood very still for a long time. Outside, the distant noise of prisoners kicking a ball drifted in, muffled by the walls. Richardson's dates and locations: January 1943, Stalingrad, ceased activity, fell into Ernst like cold steel beads, one after another, precise and heavy, into a well that had been empty for too long and had nearly gone numb. There was no splash, only the dull impact at the bottom. No maybe, no perhaps, no hope remains. This was the conclusion of the largest, most authoritative enemy intelligence system processed through months of standardized workflow. It offered no detail and no story. It stated one fact drawn from radio waves: the signal was gone. In war, in Stalingrad's winter, what gone meant did not need explanation. What Ernst felt was not a new collapse, not a tearing open. Instead, a strange calm rose like molten lead, slowly filling his limbs. 3 years of tension, conjecture, joy, despair, the long nights at the headphones, the burnt receiver, the scuffed mark. Suddenly all of it lost weight, lost meaning. It was covered by something larger, colder, and certain. He had lost his brother, and at last he had lost the ghost of searching for his brother, the thing that had consumed him. "I understand," Ernst heard himself say, dry but steady. "Thank you for informing me, Captain." Richardson seemed to pause a fraction, perhaps mildly surprised by the calm response, but his professional blankness returned at once. He sealed the folder. "This conclusion will be filed. This inquiry is complete." Ernst was escorted out into sunlight. The yard was unchanged, but his senses felt wrapped in that leaden calm. He did not return to work immediately. Instead, he walked slowly to a quiet corner by the camp perimeter fence where sparse shrubs gave way to open wasteland. He leaned against a rough wooden post and slid down to the ground. No tears, no expression. He sat and watched the heat shimmer over the horizon for a long, long time. That night, on the crowded plank bunks under dim light, Ernst took a photograph from the inner pocket of his undershirt for the first time by his own choice. The edges were frayed and worn from years against his skin. In the picture, Friedrich wore civilian clothes from before enlistment, standing in front of Cologne Cathedral with a shy smile. For 3 years, Ernst had not looked at it in quiet certainty, only in anxious, stolen glances during searches or in secret after breakdowns. Now he held it in front of him and looked carefully, calmly, for a long time. Then he surveyed the crude sleeping space and set the photo upright on a small shelf made from ammunition crate boards nailed together beside his enamel cup. He did not hide it again. The next day, everything ran as usual, roll call, labor, lunch. But in free time, Ernst did not sit alone and stare into nothing. He walked over to a group of prisoners repairing a battered truck, watched for a moment, then asked if they needed an extra hand with tools. His voice stayed quiet but clear. Someone glanced at him and handed him a wrench. Ernst took it, crouched down, and began tightening a loose bolt. His movements were a bit awkward but careful. Sunlight shone on the back of his neck and on his hands. Far away, the camp's communications antenna hummed faintly in the wind, a steady, thin sound that belonged to another world and another set of rules. Ernst no longer tried to listen for meaning. He simply heard it, the way one hears wind.